We grade the trade of L'Jarius Sneed from both the perspectives of the Tennessee Titans and the Kansas City Chiefs. All that and more come up next here on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're your daily NFL podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your podcasts here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So be sure to subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form too. It is the same show, both audio and video form. We bring you 5 days a week of NFL content, biggest stories, biggest news, and analysis all the way around. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. There was some big news over the weekend, both for the Tennessee Titans and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs trading star corner L'Jarius Sneed to the Titans in exchange for just a third-round pick in 2025 and a 2024 seventh-round pick swap. So we're going to get the perspectives of both Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans and Ryan Tracy of Locked On Chiefs about the deal. We'll first start off with Tyler Rowland and give a grade for the Titans. Then we'll get to Ryan and the Chiefs and give a grade for the Chiefs. Then we'll move into the final part of the show with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers as we talk about all the change Los Angeles has gone through, from Keenan Allen to Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, and a lot more. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans. The Tennessee Titans make a massive addition to their secondary over the weekend, bringing in L'Jarius Sneed from the Kansas City Chiefs. And not only that, they got him for a bargain in terms of draft compensation, a third-round pick in 2025 and a seventh-round pick swap this year. Here to talk about this from the Titans' perspective is Tyler Rowland, the host of Locked On Titans. And Tyler, I can just sense how excited Tennessee is about this move and how they've kind of revamped their secondary, with Sneed being the prize, obviously, but Chidobe Awuzie comes in and there are other pieces as well. What was your initial reaction when the Titans made this move? And were you expecting, because there seemed to be some rumblings that Tennessee was the team, or at least the front runner for Sneed for a little while now?
Well, it's crazy how it all changed completely, Kevin, because you go back just a week ago or whatever, and all the news was, hey, it's the Colts. The Colts are the team fighting for them. They're figuring things out. You got Colts bloggers and fans saying, oh, it's confirmed, done, blah, 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 and this and that. So I even publicly had said, like, brace yourself. You know, he could go to the Colts, and that would be disappointing. But, the Titans came in and stole him away, and we saw the Titans steal Calvin Ridley away from the Jacksonville Jaguars. So now for Ran Carthon, Titans general manager, to go steal L'Jarius Sneed away from the Indianapolis Colts, it's just a huge move. And the Titans are in this position, unfortunately, because their previous general manager, John Robinson, just failed at drafting for multiple years in a row. The Titans simply do not have anyone to pay for the next 2 years. There are no internal homegrown candidates that need money that the Titans have drafted and developed. So they're going to have a better, more lenient free agent situation over the next 2 years than a normal team would have. And this is exactly the way the Titans needed to approach this. You got Will Levis on his rookie contract. Whether he's the guy or not, you have to go out there and make these moves, surround him with as much talent as you can. And again, you can afford to make these kind of moves and pay these kind of contracts because of the lack of internal guys. That's where, you don't go out and spend on free agents because you want to pay the internal guys that you drafted and developed. Well, the Titans simply don't have those guys. So that makes these moves easier for the Titans to do. It allows them more maneuverability to actually have a good team and field talent out there. The Titans just needed a total revamp in the secondary, and I would have been fine with Cheeto as the number one corner for the Titans going into the year. But now you add in L'Jarius Sneed. That slots Cheeto Awuzie in a great spot. Roger McCreary was one of the better nickels in the NFL last year. He gets to stay inside now. I think it's taken one of the biggest weaknesses in the NFL, the Titans cornerback room, and turned it into one of the best cornerback rooms in the entire NFL. In an NFL where you need to be able to stop the pass, You add that with Denard Wilson, the defensive coordinator, who's a defensive backs guy, as you would know, covering the Ravens. And I think it's just a fantastic move by the Titans, not only to get Sneed because of the great player that he is, but of course to steal him away from the Indianapolis Colts, who were the other team pushing aggressively for him.
Right. The Titans are stealing from their AFC South competitors
Yes.
this offseason. I think that makes it a lot sweeter for Titans fans this offseason. But the compensation, Tyler, is something that so many people are still so hung up on because it was that third and then a 7th round pick swap, which I think some people are wondering, well, are the Chiefs going to be able to get a first for him or a second? And now, obviously, with Sneed, the attachment to him is his contract extension. Tennessee giving him around $19 million per season with a bunch of guaranteed money in there as well. How surprised were you at one, the compensation, but then what's your feel on the contract they gave him? Do you like that move for Tennessee, or do you think it's a little rich for a player like Sneed?
Well, I think the contract is what the contract had to be. I mean, the $55 million guaranteed is the most. We got to wait to see what's truly fully guaranteed. But $19 million APY, like the average annual value of Sneed's contract, his salary is only, $19 million per season. That's the 8th highest paid cornerback. So we were hearing, number one, on the contract front, we were hearing that he was going to get 21, 22 APY, above Denzel Ward, above Jalen Ramsey, above, the Jair Alexander. And he didn't end up getting that. So the Titans didn't pay the full amount on the contract that maybe people were expecting. And then you look at the trade package. I mean, I thought for certain, Kevin, that the Titans would have to give up a 2nd round pick. You saw him in previous years. The Chiefs were able to franchise tag D Ford and then trade him for a 2nd round pick. So I thought for certain that the Chiefs would not give up one of the top 5, top 6 best cornerbacks in the NFL for anything less than a 2nd round pick. But not only did the Titans not pay a 2nd round pick, they didn't even give up a consequential pick in this year's draft. It was a 3rd in 2025. That's next year. Titans do a 7th round pick swap, but what does that really mean? I mean, the Titans really played dirt cheap trade compensation wise. I mean, you look at the Carlton Davis trade between the Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions, the big pick, the big draw in that, the Buccaneers gave up a 3rd round pick, or the Lions gave up a 3rd round pick in this year's draft. So you're telling me that Carlton Davis, who's a good player in his own right, but Carlton Davis is worth more in a trade than L'Jarius Sneed, who just dominated the NFL for an entire season and led to a Super Bowl victory? I think the Titans knew that the Chiefs were in a tough spot with their financial situation, knew that there was a limited amount of teams at this point in free agency who could pay L'Jarius Sneed what he wanted. So I think the Titans really took advantage of kind of an inefficient situation for the Chiefs, and it allowed them to get great value on the trade. And I think they got great value on the contract. And even if the $55 million guaranteed is a tad bit of an overpay, like we discussed at the beginning, the Titans can afford to do that because there's no one else to pay. It's not like, oh, you gave L'Jarius Sneed too much. Now you got to cut all these people like the Chargers or the Saints had to do. Oh, you paid L'Jarius Sneed too much. Now you can't re-sign your young, this, that. But those are not real obstacles for the Titans. So whether it be the contract, whether it be the trade compensation, I think the Titans got a great deal here. And I think it really kind of changes the calculus for the Titans in terms of what the expectations should be for them going forward.
Right. You don't want to just sit on all that money all offseason. And let's face it, I think if L'Jarius Sneed was in free agency, he didn't get franchise tagged. If that was the situation, he would have been by far the best free agent left on the market right now. But even with everybody still one of the top free agents on the market, and you get him for less than $20 million per season. So I think a great move for Tennessee all around.
I would have wanted L'Jarius Sneed anyway. If he would have got to free agency, he was at the top of my list as somebody the Titans should go after. The big thing was, hey, if you're going to have to give up a 2nd round pick and then pay, that's a little bit too much. But the trade that they made, again, 3rd round pick next year, 7th round pick swap this year, to me, I mean, it's almost like they did get to sign him outright in free agency because they didn't give up anything of true consequence this year. So to me, it almost feels like he actually did hit free agency with the way that it worked out and what the Titans had to pay.
Yeah, and I guess technically the 3rd round pick is compensatory based off the deal he would have been getting. So it would have been a 3rd round pick anyway, but obviously Kansas City and Tennessee were able to agree on a deal to get him to where he maybe wanted to go, but obviously a team that would pay him as well. But Tyler, wasn't just L'Jarius Sneed for the Titans. Calvin Ridley signs almost an $100 million contract, as he talked about a little earlier there. They bring in Tony Pollard to replace Derrick Henry. How else have you liked what Tennessee has done this offseason?
Well, obviously, you love the move of Calvin Ridley. The Titans had one of the worst wide receiver groups in the NFL, and Calvin Ridley was misused by the Jaguars last year. They had him in a number one X role, line of scrimmage, isolated. Calvin Ridley's best as a movement wide receiver, a Z wide receiver. So now you can put him back in that role. He's going to feel like that Jamar Chase role in Brian Callahan's offense where you move him around the formation, look to get him matchups. So I think having a guy on the outside who can win consistently in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins now, that gives Will Levis an opportunity to succeed. My favorite move of the entire offseason for the Titans, honestly, has been Lloyd Cushenberry at center. The Titans had one of the worst centers in the NFL last year in Aaron Brewer, who's by far the worst pass blocking starting center in the NFL, the smallest starting offensive lineman in the NFL as well. You replace him with a big-bodied, fantastic pass protector, one of the top 5 best pass protecting centers in the league in Lloyd Cushenberry. I think that's a fantastic move. At this point, the Titans just need to shore up the offensive tackle spot, and I think they've really had a fantastic offseason. And it goes past just the roster, Kevin. Getting rid of Mike Vrabel, evolving the front office, adding analytics staffers, changing the philosophy of how they do things, adding an offensive mind in Brian Callahan, bringing Bill Callahan over. I mean, the Titans have really revolutionized their franchise with this offseason. To see them continue that with the roster and really try to get better there too, it's been a breath of fresh air in Tennessee.
If I had to give a grade for Tennessee, I'd have to give them an A. I mean, as Tyler said, they don't have to pay anybody for the next 2 seasons. Sneed is a top flight corner. They're not paying him $20 million per year. It falls just under that at 19. I give it an A for Tennessee, and it's truly showing they are building their team here for the next few years under Will Levis. And for more on Tyler and his work, be sure to check him out over at the Locked On Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up, we're not done talking about L'Jarius Sneed here on Locked On NFL. We'll be talking with Ryan Tracy of Locked On Chiefs about Kansas City's perspective in the deal. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On NFL. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go to Answer America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I have UConn, so I'm still in it right now. I've had my bracket busted all the way. I mean, I've had a lot of my Elite 8 teams eliminated. It's always a mess when I pick brackets, but my champion, at least who I think is going to win, is still in it. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and bet college hoops until they cut down the nets. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We talked with Tyler Rowland in that first part of the show about L'Jarius Sneed trade from Tennessee's perspective. Now we're flipping the script, talking with Ryan Tracy of Locked On Chiefs about Kansas City's perspective. Let's get into our conversation now. The Kansas City Chiefs move on from one of the better defensive players in the NFL, trading L'Jarius Sneed to the Tennessee Titans for a 3rd-round pick in 2025 and a 7th-round pick swap. Here to talk about that with me and more Chiefs, it's Ryan Tracy, one of the hosts of Locked On Chiefs. And Ryan, I think that a lot of people somewhat expected there to either be a parting with L'Jarius Sneed for Kansas City either this offseason or maybe next, because he did want a lot of money, and corner contracts are not cheap in today's NFL, as we saw with the Tennessee trade, Tennessee extending Sneed. But moving him on at this point, we're about a month out before the draft, and the compensation that Kansas City got, for the most part, the consensus is it wasn't enough for Sneed. Where are you on the trade, and did you like it for Kansas City?
It's perplexing, the compensation. Now, it comes down to this. I like that they got the trade done. They needed to do that because there's a couple of factors here. Maybe a lot of folks outside of Kansas City don't understand what the player's situation is. 4th-round pick. I honestly found him only because I was walking a Meach Robertson tape back at La Tech back in the day in the draft cycle. He was an unknown quantity to a lot of teams. And the fact that he came in and built it up, it's been the cornerstone of what they've done recently in making great, especially defensive back selections that they're able to train up. So he is all gold. He is all profit at this point. He raised his game this year knowing it was a contract season. Our old friend Therese Paylor used to say a contract year is never, it's completely undefeated, right? That's true here as well. And so for L'Jarius, I don't think you could ask him to do anything else. He is an older prospect. He is 27 years old. He missed all of training camp with a knee injury last year. He has had concussions. He has had a shoulder. He has had a number of things that knock down the longevity. And the concern around Kansas City has been that the Chiefs are in a position now that Chris Jones is still productive at 30 years old. They can't project that for L'Jarius Sneed. He is so high now that there's inevitably going to be a regression. They're just not banking that it's going to be next season. It's probably the year after that is what the Chiefs are thinking. So they were comfortable. Had they had to go on the tag, the reports are still from inside the building that they would have been okay. I think this is the preference, though, that they got it done. The timing was difficult, and that drove down the compensation. And when you have to tie in on a tagged player that has to get the contract, something has to give at some point. And so when they elected the Titans to make a 55 guaranteed contract to this player, they weren't going to give up top dollar in the trade compensation. Unfortunately, it's still low. We are expecting a 3 or plus this season. Now, the Chiefs have bigger fish to fry. They have 3 Super Bowl back-to-back starters that are coming up for contract next year in Nick Bolton, in Creed Humphrey, and Trey Smith. So the third next year is starting to look like, okay, it's fitting into the puzzle about how they're going to have to go about it, but it certainly is underwhelming right now.
Right. A lot of people were saying maybe they could get a first, maybe they could get a second, but a third not even being this year, I think is where people are like, oh, that's low for a player of Sneed's caliber. But when you do put it that way, Ryan, it does make a little more sense in terms of why they needed to move on at this point, why they chose to. But now what does their corner room look like? Obviously, Trent McDuffie has burst onto the scene. He's a really quality option there. But who else is going to step up in that room, and do you expect them to make another addition as the offseason goes on?
I think there will be another addition, absolutely. But it's also going to be a big shift. Trent McDuffie's an all-pro nickel corner. He's going to play outside next season, is the vast majority of what I think is the big cornerstone of this transition, because they have a guy, Nancy Johnson, that was pushing to play at the nickel last season before camp injury. They have Nick Jones that they drafted to be that guy as well as a secondary interior, not a nickel corner, but a nickel safety hybrid. Same thing with Shamari Connor, who, with the departure of Mike Edwards, is now more likely to be the third safety than the nickel. But they have flexibility there. It all comes back to the fact that you have Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson, who have been basically splitting time at the opposite outside corner the last 2 seasons, that you feel you still have that investment in. Now, are they going to be a rocket like L'Jarius Sneed has been from the 4th round all the way up to, at this point, pushing the highest paid corner in the league? I don't foresee that, but they're both serviceable. And so you're going to let them fight it out on that one side. You're probably going to move to a different nickel. They're also going to bolster the position in the draft. Draft picks are exactly what this team wants, and they feel probably right now most comfortable in their ability to evaluate, train, and get profit off of defensive backs. So I do think they'll make another selection.
Yeah, and obviously it's not just corner for Kansas City. There are other needs they have addressed this offseason. I think everybody was talking about the wide receiver room, Ryan, and just what they were going to do after an underwhelming regular season by most of those guys. Rashee Rice, another guy who burst onto the scene for them. But outside of that, we got playoff MVS if you're Kansas City, but other than that, he's now no longer there. Now, Marquise Brown comes in, former first-round pick of the Ravens, spent some time in Arizona as well. He's a threat in that Kansas City offense. You place him next to Rashee Rice. I think a lot of people are excited about that. What else have you liked about what Kansas City's done this offseason outside of the Sneed trade?
I think that the really interesting thing is the whole focus was on Chris Jones, but they brought nearly the entire defensive line group back from a back-to-back Super Bowl run. That makes a lot of sense. Are they a year older, or in some case 2 years older? Yes. Turk Wharton came off an injury. He really didn't hit his stride until the playoff run. And they still have one major piece sitting out there, and that is Mike Dana, that I do think this trade is going to allow them the cap space to go re-sign. So I do expect him back as well. Charles Omenihu is going to be out for a bit, had that late season injury. So again, they've done a very good job, but they're going to make another acquisition of the defensive line, whether it be on edge to supplement their first-round pick of last season, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, B.J. Thompson's in there. They have some young talent, but they need a little honing. I expect Omenihu to play on the outside when he does return. So it's just as likely that they go interior defensive line in this draft as well.
And you mentioned those draft picks. Kansas City, they've drafted and they've found guys in all 3 phases of this draft. First round, day 2, day 3. But when you talk about that number 32 overall selection, Ryan, do you see them going with the corner if the player's right? Do you see another need for them you'd like them to pick? Where do you think they go right now, about a month before the draft?
This confirms the Brett Veach plan, the way that he does things. And I, for one, am a proponent of it. He's going to do everything he can to shore up every single position so that if he had to go play the season tomorrow, he could get it done. And all the draft picks are icing on the cake. Don't know if he's going to get that done, but it does leave the possibility open. If you get a corner that you have rated as a first-round grade, and the Chiefs generally only run 17 or 18 first-round grades going into a draft. If one of your guys is still there, and it happens to be a corner rather than one of the receivers or one of the tackles, they will definitely go select that because it's not as drastic a need, but it's definitely a need.
Yeah, and it's interesting the strategy Kansas City has had because obviously, especially with the running back position, I mean, they drafted Isaiah Pacheco, and there's been all this conversation about the running back room. Well, on the past 2 Super Bowl winning teams for Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco's salary has been what? $700,000 or something along those lines. So it works out for him. But Ryan, the free agency period, it's a long process. Obviously, everybody gets excited about the first couple of days because that's where all the action happens. But outside of corner, what do you think they're going to do, or who do you think they're going to target outside of maybe their own players on their roster here?
I think that's probably the bulk of it. That does include left tackle Donovan Smith. I do think they want a veteran back in the room to provide competition, little guidance. He should come back on a cheap contract, and they liked what he brought to the locker room last year. So I do think that's an outside possibility. There's always a couple of guys here and there. They need to bolster what is their second line. They lost Nick Allegretti, who had to step in and start for them in the Super Bowl, but has been their sixth man for 5 seasons running. They need to bolster that. They have Frankie Aliendo on the roster. I'm sorry, not Frank. But they have a guy that can fill that role, but I don't know that he's up to playing a season should he have to step in for a Joe Thuney who's coming off of a pec tear. So I do think they're going to look at interior offensive line as well.
If I had to give this one a grade, we'll give a grade for Kansas City here also. I'd probably give it a C, C+. I mean, I understand Ryan did a really good job of explaining the actual reasons why Kansas City decided to move on, but a lot of people were expecting a second rounder. I think that Kansas City, again, they can replace him, but it's going to be really hard. So I think Kansas City, they had to do it with the guys coming up and the guys they have to sign, but still losing a guy like L'Jarius Sneed and having to rely on other guys when you already have that proven player, it is tough. So look, Kansas City has proven they can develop some guys. Obviously, Trent McDuffie waiting in the wings, but I'm going to give it a C+ or C for Kansas City. And for more on Ryan's work, be sure to check him out over at the Locked On Chiefs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the final part of the show, move away from L'Jarius Sneed, but stay in the AFC West, talking with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers. Stay tuned. It's time to get to on Locked On NFL. We're back our final segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in today and making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. We are a one-stop shop for daily NFL coverage, news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards. Be sure to subscribe in video form and audio form, the whole 9 yards. Building up something really special here on Locked On NFL. And I really think that we're going places. We already are going places on this network. So really appreciate everybody for your support. Let's talk about the Chargers now. We'll talk with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers about what's going on in Los Angeles. They bring in Jim Harbaugh, but there's a lot of other change like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and more. Let's talk about it now. Plenty of change going on in Los Angeles right now with the Chargers, and we're not even talking about the head coach anymore, which is a big one in itself. Personnel changes aplenty. Here to talk about that with me is Daniel Wade, one of the hosts of Locked On Chargers. And Daniel, I think for what the Chargers had decision-wise this offseason, everybody knew that it was going to be a different team in 2024, not only because of the head coaching with Jim Harbaugh coming in, but because there were a lot of albatross contracts on the roster, and there were going to have to be some potential restructures, potential extensions, just outright potential cuts. And we've seen a lot of that in Los Angeles. Keenan Allen gets traded to the Bears. Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa both stay with the Chargers on different deals. And obviously Mike Williams gets cut. He's now a New York Jet. How different does this team look, and how weird is it for you to, first of all, not see Keenan Allen's name as a member of the Chargers anymore, but even Austin Eckler, who spent a considerable amount of time there and was really good for a really long time?
Yeah, the Keenan Allen one, I mean, that one is so tough. It felt like the dude was going to retire as a Charger, and the nice thing about it was he was playing well enough to where you weren't having to, just keep him around because he's a legend, right? Like, you were keeping him around because he's still playing at such a high level. So to see him get moved during this offseason, even in an offseason that we knew was going to have a lot of change and bring a lot of change, that one hurts, right? He wasn't willing to move on what his contract was going to pay him this year. They asked him to take a pay cut. He declined it. I understand it. He's coming off of his best season, one of them at least. And then they wanted to give him an extension that he didn't feel like was fair money. So when that happened, They offered the extension. He declined it, declined the pay cut, and he got moved where, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and those guys took actual pay cuts this year, right? Took some little bit of restructure and helped the team financially have the flexibility to go and do what Tom Telesco couldn't, which was build a team that has some good depth and not just that top-end talent. As far as Austin Eckler goes, it's weird, but that one isn't as surprising just because of how last offseason went. He held out a little bit because he didn't get the long-term extension that he wanted. He wanted double-digit millions. And it was for good reason, because when he went into that season, exactly what he didn't want to happen happened to him, right? Got hurt early on in the season, came back, never really looked the same, had a huge drop-off in production, and then went out in free agency and only could secure, an average of $4 million per season before incentive. So he was looking for double-digit millions. The Chargers were reluctant to give it to him, and he was upset about it. So I kind of saw that, divorce coming in a way. That one's not as surprising. The Keenan Allen one, even the Mike Williams one, those ones were a little more surprising just because we weren't sure exactly how it was all going to go down.
Yeah, and again, a lot of change in Los Angeles right now. And I think for a lot of fans, it's just going to look a lot different for Los Angeles. But I think, again, it's a good thing to kind of restart a window. But the Chargers did have a window, Daniel, with Justin Herbert's rookie contract. Now, they made a bunch of big moves, obviously, with the Keenan Allen huge contract. They signed a guy like J.C. Jackson, trade for Khalil Mack, moves you should be making with a quarterback on a rookie deal. But how do you look back on that era of Chargers football, and do you think the Chargers could have done more to keep them in contention while Herbert was on his rookie contract?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll look back on it just as missed opportunities, right? Like, it just seems like that's what it was, because, you look back a couple of seasons ago where they had the game in week 18 against the Raiders where all they needed to do was tie to get Herbert into the playoffs for the first time. They lost in overtime in that game. Herbert went nuts. Wasn't enough. Then you have the game the next year against Jacksonville, the 27-0 game. Like, those were all the moves you made to get yourselves into that spot, to get yourself into those moments, and they couldn't come through when it was undoubtedly easier to have all those other big contracts surrounding him. And I think it's just a lot of strikeouts as well, right? You're not going to find many free agency strikeouts in the last few seasons that are as bad as J.C. Jackson and the dead cap hit they're having to deal with now because of that. So that was a huge swing and a miss. And I think in trying to keep all those star players and for trying to go for those home runs instead of hitting the right amount of singles and doubles, it was so many home runs or strikeouts that you ended up with top-heavy rosters that by the end of the season were so battered that they were unrecognizable and you weren't able to achieve the things you wanted to.
Right, and so Chargers fans can leave that in the past, but looking ahead to the present and hopefully a good future, Daniel, the Chargers have been active in free agency. It's the first offseason for Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz as a pairing. How have you liked what they've done so far over the first couple weeks of free agency?
I've liked it a lot, and I think you have to really separate free agency from the rest of things that have happened as far as like the Keenan Allen trade and the release of Mike Williams and stuff like that, because I would obviously like the free agent moves a lot more if they were happening surrounding a team that already had an elite weapon like Keenan Allen to build around, so you weren't as worried about the offense. But as far as just the free agent moves themselves, I feel like they've been very intentional. I feel like they've been very targeted to build depth on this team and to give themselves as much flexibility as possible going into the draft, where receiver obviously is one of those positions where it feels like they have to take one early and they need two before they start next season potentially. But every other position that they've attacked in free agency, they've gotten a guy like a Bradley Bozeman, for example, where it's like, is Bradley Bozeman the center of the future? Probably not. But what it does do is gives you the flexibility to where if you want to wait a little bit later in the draft and then take a center, you can have him season under Bradley Bozeman, a dude who's already done it in Greg Roman's offense and can give you that stopgap, be that bridge player. And there's a lot of bridge players who at the very worst, even if they don't end up starting, are going to be very solid depth pieces, and something this team has really, really lacked over the last several years. I mean, a really, really long time. And there's a lot of those, a lot of, bounce back candidates. The Gus Edwards of the world, right? Obviously come in with a great fit. But then you have the guys like the Hayden Hurst, the Will Disleys to get that blocking tight end. The Christian Fulton's another real bounce back candidate as a, former second round pick that kind of flamed out in Tennessee. So there's a lot of those moves where they're building up the depth on this team. And some of those positions are like, okay, I might not want that guy to start, right? But you're giving yourself some flexibility where at least you have a higher floor than if you're relying on a bunch of rookies with all of the turnover happening this year. You have guys that we've actually seen do it at a decent level at the NFL level.
Daniel's great. And for more on Daniel, check him out over at the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content. Stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.